Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, August 16th. So glad you could join me. One of the highlights of my week every week is sit around looking at some poems together. And we got a great crew on hand. Everybody's in the house. We've got, I gotta scroll way up. It's Andy Blanchard's here, Gary Rawson, Nancy Sabanek, Morgan Feeney, Winston Munn, Mark Grinier's here, Dick Wistheimer, hey Dick. Brian O'Sullivan's here, Dr. Q, Dee Coleman, Monica Dobo, Steve Harrell. Let's see who else we got. Sander Fees, Maria L. Berg, Cindy Guntherman's here, Brandis Askin, Tara McMahon, Elizabeth Wolf, hey, from Merrimack Valley, Massachusetts. Good to see you, Elizabeth. Clayton Clark down the hill from me in La Cañada. Nancy Huggett is here from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation in Ottawa. Very nice to see that. Nancy. Sharon Ferrante's here from Daytona Beach. Blue Forest Jewelry, so from England. Nice to see jewelry represented. We got Jamal Uden is here. Yeah, let's see. Hamet Melik. Good to see you all. Okay. So over on Facebook, we got anybody here? Jenny Milton's there. Rose Lennard is here. So good to see you both. Always a smaller crew on the Facebook, but always nice to see. I'll try to swing over and get some comments there too. Now it is one of those days where we're going to go back through the oldest poems in the queue. If we look back at what we've got, we're going back to February 28th. So not too bad. We're kind of catching up. I'd like to have it so there's less turnaround for the critique of the weeks. And so that's what we'll do. If you would like to participate, if you're new to this, all you have to do is go to rattle.com/critique, or you can find that in the menu, and you'll see the link to submit your poems up for critique. Send up to 2. Usually 2's preferable, but if you want to just send 1, that's okay as well. And if it's someone I recognize who participates in the things we do, I'll move you up to the top. Otherwise, we'll go back to the oldest poems in the queue in the order they were received. And that's what we're doing today. So leave as many comments as you can in the chat windows. Also, I should say a great episode of the Poetry Space just dropped. That's Katie Dozier's podcast. And it was with George Bilguer. Really fun talking to him, Dick Wistheimer, and I don't think Brian O'Sullivan was there this week, but Nate Jacob was there. Yeah, that was it. And it was really fun talking to George Bilguer about accessibility. We called it poetic hospitality, but that's something we talk about on the critique all the time. So if you'd like to check that out, you should just go to itunes.com/the poetry space, I think. Something like that. Type the poetry space in iTunes. Let's see. Anyway, so if you want, leave as many comments as you can. Let's try to help these folks get better as poets. That's always the goal. Always trying to be helpful. Never trying to be harsh, but we try to be honest. So let's dive in. So like I said, this first submission is from September 28th this year. So about, 6 months ago. It'd be nice if it was just a few months. That's what we're trying to catch up on. We have 67 in the queue right now. And hopefully we can get through 5 or 6 of these today, and we'll get a little more caught up than we were yesterday. So here's the first poet is Emily Natividad from Cerritos, California. And no comments. There's a space you can leave comments if you'd like. No comments here, specific questions. But let's take a look at the poem, which was pasted into the body of the email. Here we go. Now this, the poem, I don't know what the P4 is, but the poem is called The Serenity Veil, and that's what I was putting the title field to on Submittable, so that's definitely the title. So let's see, The Serenity Veil. A hint of tactile murmurs under the fingertips of the painting. The canvas breathes so soft, echoing each stroke with a lingering assonance that accompanies her silent sleep. Personifying mystery in the art, Mona Lisa's grin was a whispered secret, her stealthy consonants and shadows echoing through the fabric of history. Gleaming eyes that resemble velvet pools, assonance in their calm depths, repetition in their peaceful breaths, and the stories hidden that are worth dreaming. Her face is covered with tactile elegance and tranquility as if it were a veil. She maintains her position quietly, a timeless mystery to solve. So there you go. That is The Serenity Veil. And once again, the poet was Emily Natividad. And, so... Yeah, Andy Blanchard, page 4, I bet. Yeah, that's what I think P4 means, but I didn't know if it was part of the title either, is what I was saying. Okay, so this poem, and one of the things I was going to mention too, the prompt for this week for the Rattlecast coming up on Sunday is to write a poem where your least favorite word to see in a poem is the title. So we can maybe look for some poems, for some words we might be able to use in some of these poems too. So the title, The Serenity Veil, is kind of interesting, but there's a lot of words like serenity, words like tactile, assonance. There's whispers, there's consonants, echoes, and fabric. There are all these words that sort of add detail, but in a very general way. Too many tactiles is something Jamal Uden says. And Andrea Montijo says, "What's the meaning of assonance in the context of this poem?" And so the poem feels to me like it's trying to have a lot of concrete feel to it, and yet it's using these sort of abstract concepts for what it's trying to describe. So we don't really get a sense of actually feeling and being there, you know. So a hint of Serenity Veil. Well, I start with this. It's a perfect example. A veil is something that you can sort of feel, but then serenity, doesn't really add anything that you can like feel or make it seem clear. You know what I mean? It's an interesting phrase and it's an interesting word to use to combine the two, but it doesn't actually like add anything to the image or to the concept that you're creating. Serenity Veil. So it's a mystery. So, but then we have a lot of stuff like that. So a hint of tactile murmurs. And tactile murmurs sounds interesting, but then once you start, like, what is it actually adding? How is a murmur tactile? And how does that create a feeling of what's going on in the poem? And it's sort of, there's an emptiness to it because it doesn't actually add a lot, even though they're nice phrases, if that makes sense. It's sort of the poet's not actually going anywhere, even though it's adding phrases like tactile murmurs, a hint of tactile murmurs. Under the fingertips of the painting, the canvas breathes so soft, echoing each stroke with a lingering assonance that accompanies her silent sleep. Yeah. So I like the idea of the canvas breathing. You can sort of see something kind of interesting starting to develop with that concept. It's sort of a personifying of the canvas itself. As Morgan Phoenix says, tactile murmurs is wordy but not concrete. And so this idea of the canvas actually breathing and the strokes being applied to the canvas as it was painting, that's the kind of thing that makes a poem come to life. But a lot of the stuff is too abstract to actually do that. Yeah, Nancy Huggett says, I do love the canvas breathing. Yeah. So those are the details. The canvas breathing and then feeling the strokes. I like the assonance here actually, even though because it's like a whooshy kind of sound. It's a weird way to use assonance. But you can kind of see like the softness of the brushstroke lingering there. So I kind of like the use of assonance. It's unusual but interesting, and that feels something. But then there's a lot of sort of poetic filler, and I think we're getting a lot of that. So personifying mystery in the art. So we have a description, kind of like an explanation. This is what the painting is doing, personifying mystery. And that is an abstraction. And the abstractions just don't engage as much as concrete details. And so we get a lot of abstraction like that. Mona Lisa's grin was a whispered secret. And that's very nice, a whispered secret of the grin. And it kind of goes along with the assonance, too, that we're hearing. And so how can we heighten these two? The sounds are really working well. The canvas breathing, the lingering assonance, and the whispered secret. Those are the things that I think are working. Her stealthy consonants in shadows. Now, where understood, assonance seemed to fit. The consonants, the hardness of it being in the shadows, it didn't really make sense to me. So, I don't know. And then echoing through the fabric of history. And the fabric of history is another line, like the tactile murmurs, that seems like it's adding something, but not really adding any actual detail. And it's a bit of a cliche to say fabric of history. And again, we get gleaming eyes, kind of a cliche, resemble velvet pools. Velvet pools are interesting. So instead of gleaming eyes that resemble velvet pools, why not go more direct and say the velvet pools of her eyes? And on there you have a great phrase. And then we repeat assonance again. in the calm depths, another kind of cliche, kind of like fabric of history. Repetition in their peaceful breaths, and whose peaceful breaths, and the breath is repeating from here. So there's just a lot of lines in this poem that aren't adding to it, even though there's some nice lines that, that work. And stories hidden that are worth dreaming. And that goes back, sort of repeating the personifying mystery. It's still the same kind of summarizing thing. Her face is covered with tactile elegance. So we repeat tactile from the murmurs. And what would tactile elegance be? The same thing as tactile murmurs. Like, it's just so abstract that it doesn't actually add anything to the poem. And tranquility as if it were a veil. I like the tranquility as if it were a veil. That's a nice concept. So there's another good line. She maintains her position quietly, a timeless mystery to solve, and then we end up with one of those summarizing lines. So you can see, if we go through line by line like we just did, some of the lines are really great and feel like they're building into something, but a lot of lines are just sort of not really saying much. And so what we really have are some nice things. The canvas breathing. If we could go to the canvas breathing, the lingering essence, we could just describe the scene in the canvas in that strange way that we wouldn't usually talk about the Mona Lisa. And, her eyes, the velvet pools of her eyes, we could use that kind of phrase. We could go through, but we still only have like maybe 6 lines. But that's a great start to a poem. So to me, what this poem is sort of a great start to a poem. And it's looking for its like volta. Like, it's looking for its turn. It's looking for something surprising to do. A lot of times when you're doing this kind of ekphrastic type poem, it's nice to turn back to the actual viewer. I'm at the gallery, or I'm watching somebody at the gallery. There's this person at the gallery, or somewhere else that Mona Lisa's appeared. Just go somewhere else. Like, you're in the room with the Mona Lisa. If we cut out and just left those great lines that I was talking about and cut out the ones that don't really add anything, we would sort of have a real feel of the painting and a sort of the sound going on. And then where could we go? Like, you're in that space, you sort of establish the Mona Lisa. Then what can you do? What does it remind you of? Why did you want to write about this? Take it to somewhere else. Because the poem is sort of just the start of a poem, really. It hasn't gone a place. Yeah. Gary Rasmussen says the poem continue on another page. That last line has no punctuation. Yeah, it doesn't. It just ends here. So I'm not sure. It could have been a bad, a mistake paste. But, yeah. So Morgan Phoenix says, a timeless mystery to solve. Just leaves us hanging. What is the mystery? And next, like, we for the purpose of a poem is to explore something. It's to sort of understand something in a new way. Language is a tool for realization, for revelation. And so there was a reason this poem came to be. And I think we're repeating that question, that timeless mystery. What is that timeless mystery? We're repeating that, but we haven't sort of dug in and explored that. So if you start writing this, and then you start to, your mind starts to wander into a different place, like, pick up that thread and see where it's taking you. We need to go somewhere new so we can figure out what it is, this mystery that we're trying to explore. Nate Jacob says, I want this entire poem reduced to a single quatrain, then to spend a few more quatrains solving or at least making assumptions about the mystery of the last line. Let this punting carry the poet off. That's a great way to put it. Exactly what I was saying, Nate. So, yeah. So, put the good stuff into one little section. I think we get 6 lines maybe if we did, and then take off somewhere new. Okay. Hopefully that was helpful. I think we kind of covered this poem. I should say there's like 4 times as many people watching as have clicked like. If you haven't clicked like yet on YouTube, please do. That helps more people come in. The like to view ratio is important for the suggestions later. Let's see. I'm looking over at Facebook too. Jenny Middleton says, is this a poem about the mystery of the subject, the woman Mona Lisa, or about the mystery of creating art? I think being clear about that might help move this poem on. That's a good suggestion too. And some of the most interesting lines, I guess it's important to point that out. So I'm glad you did, Jenny. Some of the most important, some most interesting lines are not about the painting itself and what she means in that sort of Mona Lisa smile cliche type thing, but are about the strokes on the canvas and the assonance of that sound and the canvas breathing. Like, that actual canvas having life is sort of the most interesting and surprising part of that. So is this about creating art? And maybe that's the direction it needs to go. Maybe instead of, maybe it's going back in time to the studio where Leonardo da Vinci was painting this. There's just a lot of ways to go. You have to go somewhere new, though. Okay, so that's going to do it for that poem. Yeah, okay. Let's go on to the next. Yeah, Winston Munn puts it this way. I like the summarizing in different ways people have, because we kind of, now that we've all, looked at poems, a lot of us, for a long time on the Critique of the Week, we sort of always have similar things to say, but we say them in different ways. And so Winston puts this way: needs a turn, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. So that's great. Thanks, Winston. All right. So next up, that was Emily Natividad with the Serenity Veil. Let's go to another poem. Let's label this so that I don't forget. And next is Lielta Tabibi from Cerritos again. That's interesting. Wasn't the last poet from Cerritos? Maybe this is like a school class that people had. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you'll get, we'll look at the Ekphrastic Challenge, and usually we have like 500 or 600 submissions for that. Sometimes we will, it'll suddenly be 800, and I'll realize halfway through reading that a whole class, like one teacher, all 120 of her students submitted. Maybe that's something that happened here, because that's Cerritos too. That's unusual. Again, no questions, a poem pasted into the body of the email. Let's take a look at this. And the title, which you can't see, it's like off the page, it's Beyond the Meal. Beyond the Meal. And it's pasted in, that's the title. I think this might be a student in the same high school. It's from a CUSD. So, yeah. Okay. Unified School District, I assume that is. Okay, so maybe we have a bunch of these. Okay, here we go. This is Beyond the Meal. Beyond the Meal. 12 people gathered around tables like bees swarming around honey. But the honey was the man sent from the one above, sweeter than anything a bee could make. No one afraid of the scene in front of them, yet everyone is afraid of the possibilities to become of them. One of them with intent to betray, one of them yearning to pray. Breaking bread as if his soul fell apart in his hands, and handing it out like it filled the last piece of the puzzle in their souls, fulfilled and yet uncertain of how to not let the pieces fall apart, and weary of the one to soon leave, weary of their souls to soon restart. His eyes spoke unrecognizable words, his mouth read what was unseen, his ears heard what was unclean. His hands touched hearts beyond the simple soul, the Last Supper, the one to make weary hearts whole. Yeah. Okay. So this is, once again, it was called Beyond the Meal, was the title. And to me, the poem had a lot of life in the first stanza. Because we had this metaphor, which is really interesting. 12 people gathered around tables like bees swarming around honey. But the honey was the man sent from the one above, sweeter than anything a bee could make. And so, you notice how, because this is such an unusual way to describe the scene, that makes it really interesting and really engaging. And if the poem stuck in that mode, it would work really well. So I think it's a great start to the poem. How can you continue that metaphor? How can you continue describing it in this way? Maybe it's the kind of thing where you want to push the extended metaphor all the way through to the end of the poem and have it be all about honey and bees. Morgan Feeney's already saying this. For me, the first stanza was the strongest. After it was a bit difficult, sort of unclear pronouns. And two, so it has this interesting, metaphor that you don't usually see. And you can really see 12 people gathering around the table like bees swarming around honey. You can really see that. And it's that's what we're talking about in the last submission, where we're saying, things being concrete. That's what it means. You can actually sort of feel and see that scene playing itself out. Annie Blanchard says, or at least end with the bees and honey. Like, couldn't go back to that. Dick Westheimer points out, though, although lines 2 and 3 feel so cliche, the one above. And yeah, that's a good point, too. So if we just, again, if we sort of withheld this, I know a lot of times we talk about this, too. We don't want poems to be obscure and sort of hide their meaning. But but they're powerful if you let the reader make the connection. And so if we dropped off this sent from the one above and just kept him a man, but we didn't really know, and then we can make the leap for ourselves, the poem becomes stronger on that. So my, stay with the strangeness of this image right here. And I think the poem will be interesting and come to life. Now, looking at stanza 2 and 3, and as it moves on, it loses that sense of that distinctive, unusual metaphor, and it's just started sort of having, imageless, plain, metaphorless, plain sort of language, and yeah. Annie Blanchard says that would make the one above the queen bee, just saying. And that's a good point, too. That's the way you can push the metaphor more. Like, how many, and, research is a great thing to do in poems, too. Like, read articles on honeybees on Wikipedia. See how many interesting things you can do there and how your mind will swarm around them and to extend and push this metaphor and make it more interesting. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, but then we get the second stanza, though. No one afraid of the scene in front of them. And who's no one? Yet everyone is afraid of the possibilities to become them. Like, is this really no one in the world, and this is everyone in the world? And how, I don't know. There's a big distance and abstraction here. One of them with intent to betray, one of them yearning to prey. And so are we talking about just the 12 people? Maybe we're just talking about the 12 people. Yeah. Breaking bread as if his soul fell apart. So we get soul too. And soul's a word that's sort of melodramatic all the time. We try to want to avoid soul. Breaking bread as if, and breaking bread's kind of a cliche, as if his soul fell apart in his hands. Sorry, I gotta move this over. Okay. His hands, and handing it out like it filled the last piece of the puzzle in their souls. Again, we get souls again. Fulfilled and yet uncertain of how to not let the pieces fall apart. And weary of the one to soon leave, weary of their souls to soon restart. And it feels like it was written toward this rhyme too, but there's not a lot of rhyme in the poem, so it doesn't make sense. But how can you use a bee metaphor, extend that, or a beekeeper? You can move around with that place, but how can you tell this part if they were bees, though? And that would make the poem interesting. But instead we're sort of generalizing and distancing from the original image. Okay. His eyes spoke unrecognizable words, his mouth read what was unseen, his ears heard what was unclean. And so turning back to him, but imagine he's actually surrounded by bees. How can that, So, yeah. So turning back to him, but imagine him being swarmed by bees, and what would that reveal about it? And we get that it's the Last Supper. So, yeah. Yeah, Leela Holmes says, break bread soaked in his honeyed hands. Yeah, I mean, just go with that strange image of the bees. I think the poem will be interesting. But, for poems to be interesting, it's different ways of looking at the world, because that expands our understanding of the world, to be looking at things in a different way. There's that, what's that, the Dead Poet Society with Robin Williams, and they all stand on the desks. It's a great metaphor. You don't usually see the classroom from that angle. And a poem lets you stand on the desk and see the world from a little bit different angle, and then you understand the world better. And that's what it's about. So when we get these interesting metaphors that we've never seen before, that expands our understanding of things too. And so how can you push that or similar things like that into this poem, rather than just talking in the abstract about what's actually there? Okay. Let's see. Nate Jacob says, Jesus as honey could really go off in a fantastic metaphorical direction. The entire world as hive or field of flowers, etc. Make this a single and tight metaphor. Make it buzz. Yeah, great way to put it, Nate. And so that was Beyond the Meal again, and that was by Laelta Tabibi. Okay, so that's gonna go on to another poet. 1 second to mark this as read, and then we'll see if it's someone from Cerritos too. Another student, Selena. So we got this whole Cerritos, California thing going on. This is Selena Matthew. Selena Matthew. This is The Night We Met. The Night We Met. Here we go. It's going to be hard to fit it all on one screen. Give me a second. We'll take off these little boxes that help us not be distracted. Okay. The Night We Met. And maybe I should help it out by going like, does this help? Yeah, that's better. Okay. That's what we'll do when they're like this. Just trying to give us the best viewing experience as well. There you go. Okay. The night we met. This plane is taking so long, my head feels heavy, and this random woman is asleep on my shoulder. I would complain more, but all I can think about is how this is the first time I've felt this peaceful and been able to rest in 3 weeks. My work has been keeping me up all night, and I'm finally able to take a break as I discover the mind-blowing pyramids of Egypt. Your plane has now landed in Cairo, Egypt. Enjoy your stay. Goodbye. The horrific flight attendant chirped into the speakers. I was excited to go see the world, but I still couldn't get my eyes off this woman. Her eyes were beautiful, her skin was smooth, she was the most perfect woman. Oh, I am just so embarrassed, I apologize for falling asleep on you. What can I do to make it up to you? The woman whispered as she looked up at me. We ended up talking all the way out of the airport and realized that we had both landed in Egypt to get away from all the disastrous things at home. We had talked the whole way about how we both came from Kerala, India, and wanted to discover the pyramids of Egypt. She was so interesting to me, and I didn't know why. The next day, we ended up traveling to the pyramids together and went around the city of Cairo together. Let's go here, Annie laughed, as she dragged me into a random bar in the city. We danced all night, ate fantastic food, and I couldn't take my eyes off of this woman I met only 20 hours ago. She was nothing I have ever seen before. We laughed as we danced on top of tables in Egypt, and I was in awe of the fact that 22-year-old me was in a completely different country meeting the girl of my dreams. And that's it, yeah. So Hamet was saying, I hope it's a Haibun. No, and as Dick Westheimer says, it seems at first glance like a flash fiction or short fiction rather than a poem, and I agree. What the difference is, it's really hard to tell. And I'm not even sure, prose poetry is a sort of its own little genre that leaps between the two. But this feels like it's just attempting to be a really short fiction to me. Because it sort of moves in space, prose poetry is sort of more contained within a sort of, I don't know, in the same way a haiku is like one breath, It's hard to put a finger on it, but prose poetry is sort of like one thought or one like impulse, and it doesn't move around as much as fiction does. And also, Nate Jacobs is not musical enough to be poetry. There's not enough emphasis on the sound of language, too. I mean, prose poetry, as opposed to fiction, has a lot more intensity of language as well. So, so this, I would just say it's not poetry. It's fiction. It's prose. And the difference between the two is, poetry lives in your breath. It's sort of a dance in your tongue, on your mouth, the dance of the breath. And, you can do that in prose without line breaks. But fiction or prose lives in the mind's eye. You're generating thoughts and images. So we can sort of enter a scene and get lost in that story. You want to get lost in the story. In fiction and poetry, you want to get lost in the breath and the rhythm of the movement. It's a dance. And so this is more the fiction side. One really note that'll be helpful for fiction writing, though, is for quotes, for when you're doing dialogue. You really only want to do dialogue in fiction if it's advancing character in some way. So, and if not, then you just paraphrase. So this will help in fiction, too. So this thing, your plane, this was your plane has now landed in Cairo, Egypt. Enjoy your stay. Goodbye. Unless the flight attendant, and this is what the horrific flight attendant chirped, unless the flight attendant is somebody you want to develop as a character, or unless there's something really unique about what she's saying, just always paraphrase. The horrific flight attendant chirped a goodbye into the speakers. Like, that's all you want for that phrase. You don't want more speech than that, because it's just not as strong as other stuff. Describing it and paraphrasing packs a lot more in per syllable than words. So that was one of the main things I taught, because Janet Fitch, the novelist, really focused on that. That was one of the things she liked to talk about. It's how little dialogue you should actually use, unless there's a reason for it. There should always be a reason. And so the same thing, too, if you're going to have dialogue like this, I'm just so embarrassed, I apologize for falling asleep on you, what can I do to make it up to you? It has to be really feel like it's developing the character in the way that the character speaks and in certain details. And so, So there's that. There's a little nugget, but I don't even think it's not really poetry, and so we shouldn't linger on this one too long. It's more fiction, and I used to write some fiction, but I don't really do fiction anymore. Michelle Noble says, "Why is she the horrific?" Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, that's gonna be it for this one. Let's move on to the next poem. And next up, let's see if it's another person from the same high school. Nope, we are moved on. This is Emily Arnold Fernandez, who I think we see here frequently. I didn't notice that, or I would have moved it up. From the Isle of Islay. And where is that? The Isle of Islay. I have to look that up. I'm curious. The Isle of Islay. Or wait, no, I can do it. See, Smiddle's got this weird thing where you can't see the country unless you look at... Oh, Great Britain. Or Scotland. Okay. You can't see the country on one screen. You have to flip to another screen. It makes no sense. But anyway, are there any general questions? No questions to ask. Just two poems here. Okay. So, and Emily says this is kind of a long poem. So I expect this would count as both of my poems if you select it for your critique. She does have a second one. We'll take a glance at that. We'll see how it goes. This is Grandma's Last Visit. Okay, here we go. Grandma's Last Visit. Okay. 1. Granddaughter 15. She doesn't have any American friends. You don't even speak to me, just to Mom. I'm superfluous, unseen, a prop for your petulance. I turn, I don't hear Mom's reply. No one even notices my flounce. In my room, the clench and bile of contradiction, which will mark my tombstone. Familia super omnia? Friends or family you choose? Hold fast to the principles unto death? The chisel slips in my clammy hands. In the kitchen, cancer eats you. 2. Daughter, 45. Mom, why could you not love my children as I do? Learn their cares, see their luminous beauty. When I was in high school, we mourned Dad separately. It marked us forever. I know you loved me, but I felt alone. You were absurd. Maybe grief does that. Now I see what was squeezed out of after is not the same. You see beauty in 3 shades only, sea green, lemon yellow, dusky rose. My children are rainbows. I forgive you, but it makes me sad. 3. Granddaughter, 15. The angry squeeze of my heart pumps memories like snapshots. Your home, old-fashioned elegance, clean sunlight on hardwood floor, lemon walls, white trim, dusky rose by the bedside. Your 1980 Audi, all sea green and leather. You, old Beverly Hills stylish, Hepburn but not flighty. I wanted to be like your image. I don't know how to forgive you. It makes me sad. 4. Daughter, 45. My first teenager. All her new feelings are new for me too. I wish she had stayed here. Some leaving cannot be undone. Not my first loss. When Dad went to the hospital with Hodgkin's, you didn't tell me he was going to die. With you, I know, cancer kills. The feelings are old and new. She has your body type. In her senior photo, the image will remind me of you. I have your blood. It will be squeezed from my heart. It will not be the same when it reabsorbs. So there's some nice parts to this poem. Tara Meslick McMahon asked if I could talk a little bit about my thoughts about using you in a poem, the second person. And this is something, if you've been around for critique, you've heard me talk about this before. But it's a good time to talk about it, actually, because we have the you here. And it's a good, actually, example of when it works and kind of when it doesn't. But the thing that I always talk about is when I first started editing Rattle, the previous editor was Stella Sue Lee, who edited Rattle from 98 to 2004 or something. But she didn't like you poems, she called it. And she really, if you look back at Rattle, there aren't that many. She didn't like the second person. And it's because it's hard to become attached, to have that sort of feeling of empathy, because you don't know who the you is very often. The you can be so many things, because it can be speaking to the reader, it can be speaking to a specific person, like an epistolary type poem where there's someone being addressed. and it could be speaking to myself, where just, you shouldn't do that, Tim, And so there's all these options that make the poem completely different. And it's easy not to be clear about that in a way that makes you feel lost. And it's really difficult to have a same connection when you have to like sew together all that ambiguity. And so you poems are a little tricky, is all I'd say about it. If you sort of establish who the you is, who's speaking to who, or what's going on, no matter who that is, then it works totally fine. But you have to do this like extra step to make sure you're establishing who the you is referring to. So yeah. So Grandma's last visit. And Holly Elliott says grandma equals you, the title seems to point. And I think so. So I think what I was going to say, and this is about the you too. And when we get to the second part, I believe this is my reading of this is that the you is always the grandma. It's grandma's last visit, and it's the granddaughter talking to her and the mother talking to her, right here, or the daughter. She's the daughter of grandma. So and to me, I think in this section, the second section, I think this was the strongest, and it was because it really felt authentically spoken to the grandma. So Mom, why could you not love my children as I do, learn their care, see their luminous beauty? There's a way that it feels like the speaker here, the mother, I guess we'll call her, is daughter. She's daughter in here because it's referencing the grandma, but you can feel really that it's being spoken to the grandmother in this one, and I think that makes this stronger than the other sections to me, because the way it's written, you see beauty in three shades only: sea green, lemon yellow, dusky rose. My children are rainbows. It's really nice. There's a confidence and a sort of a strength in those lines here. In the other sections, it doesn't feel that same way. It doesn't feel like it's as clear, that the voice is as clearly, someone speaking to the grandmother. But let's look, yeah. Grandma's last visit. 1, granddaughter 15. Doesn't she have any American friends? You don't even speak to me, just to Mom. So right off the bat, because, see how this is doesn't she have any American friends? We don't know who the you is yet. That's the you issue. And so we don't know, too, who is saying this. There's like a double confusion about who's actually saying this. We don't know if it's the you don't even speak to me, just Mom. At first it's like disembodied voice. So I think it would be helped out a lot if we say, doesn't she have any American friends, you say, not even speaking to me? And pick up as quickly as we can that I'm talking to Grandma. Yeah. Michelle Noble says, I think it should start with the second line. And I think so too. I think, and it's the same thing I was just talking about actually with the fiction and what Janet Fitch has made. If she had two things that she just hammered home. One was, use as little dialogue as you can unless there's a purpose. Other thing is treat kids like they're animals and not human beings. Because you can always tell a bad writer who's never had kids if they treat younger kids like they're just humans. Because really a 3-year-old is more like a monkey. But those are the two things that stand out most. She was on the Rattlecast because she's a big fan of Rattle. She's subscribed forever. And it was fun talking to her about poetry in fiction. So if you want to go back, it's like episode 20 or something. But anyway. But yeah, I would suggest for this same reason, because this doesn't really, it adds the detail. It's an interesting thing for the grandma to be pointing out, like that criticism inherent in there. But it could be paraphrased. If it could be paraphrased, just paraphrase it, get through it, So, you ask if I have any American friends, not even speaking to me, just to Mom. Like, feel how much better that is. Like, plowing right in, and we don't know who the you is, but we know there's only one you, So anyway, so that's how I would dive in there. You ask if I have any American friends. You don't even speak to me, just to Mom. Something like that. I'm superfluous, unseen, a prop for your petulance. I turn I don't hear Mom's reply. No one even notices my flounce. So I like the prop for your petulance is a really nice line. Narrating this out, I don't know. I'm not as interested. I want to hear, because, and this is the kind of thing too. I think this is maybe why the second section is so much stronger, because it always feels the you. It always feels like it's talking to the grandma. But here we go from talking to the grandma to a sort of a general narrator who's just narrating the situation and doesn't have that direct address. So always in this section, in every section of this poem, I think, be talking to the grandma. Have the voice be talking to the grandma. You don't do this. You don't even see me turn flounce, stick with that you so we can always feel the you and feel that perspective. Like, how would the granddaughter say this to the grandma in her head, but how would she be thinking that? In my room, the clench and bile of contradiction, which will mark my tombstone. Families, does this feel like something that you would want to tell your grandma? That's why it doesn't to me. But that's why the second stanza section feels a lot stronger, because it is something that you would want to tell the mother in that case. Anyway, hold fast to principles unto death. The chisel slips in my clammy hands. I like the chisel slipping, and I think like that. People talk about the tombstone a lot, but pushing that a little farther so it's a little fresh is kind of interesting. In the kitchen, cancer eats you, and somebody pointed out, I missed it who it was, but somebody pointed out that's a great line. That is a great line. Yeah. Gary Rothman says often teenagers are mostly interested in themselves. Totally true. That's definitely true. But they would still be whining about themselves to the grandma, I think. Anyway. Okay, so daughter 45, we already mentioned, this is a good section. Mom, why could you not love my children as I do, learn their cures, see their luminous beauty? When I was in high school, we mourned Dad separately. It marked us forever. I know you loved me, but I felt alone. You were absorbed. Maybe grief does that. Now I see what was squeezed out after is not the same. You see beauty in 3 shades only, sea green, lemon yellow, dusky rose. My children are rainbows. I forgive you, but it makes me sad. Yeah. So I think that section works. Then go back to the granddaughter. And I was a little confused, because it's hard to remember how 15. And the first granddaughter was 15, but by the time I've read, page and a half, I can't remember if it was 15 I saw before, or could this be a different granddaughter, a different age, and that's why we're showing the ages? I don't really understand why we're showing the ages anyway. And so to me, my first thought when I saw this was, is this a different granddaughter? And so that's one of those things that can add a confusion that you don't really need, And so why, why do we need to know the specific ages? And also, I think it'd be more interesting if the titles here had a little bit like granddaughter does this. Daughter says this or thinks this or something. Give us a little bit more of a title there, because why not? And then we can go back, the title can be like back to the granddaughter. Anyway, 3, granddaughter, 15. The angry squeeze of my heart pumps memories like snapshots. And anytime heart pumps is kind of cliche, but the memories like snapshots, I don't know, it's sort of less so, but a little bit too. Your home, old-fashioned elegance, clean sunlight on hardwood floor. So where are we now? Because we're now at your home. So here's why I feel like it'll get a little lost. Winston Munn says with multiple characters, one turn doesn't feel like enough. Michelle Noble says it could almost be the mother speaking throughout. You know what? I think that's a good suggestion, Michelle. Because the mother is consistently the strongest sections. So why not just have the mother speak to her mother, the grandmother, about this topic the whole time? And that's where the energy seems to be. That's where the poem has its real strength. And so why not tell the whole story through that lens, and we don't get all this confusion jumping back and forth? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, your home, we already read that. Your Audi, all sea green. And this sort of hints back to this little section with the colors. But see, not as strongly, because the voice isn't as direct. Your 1980 Audi, all sea green and leather. You, old Beverly Hills stylish, Hepburn, but not flighty. I think these are good descriptions. I wanted to be like your image. I don't know how to forgive you. It makes me sad. And so see that there's just not the same strength to this. Daughter 45, my first teenager, all our new feelings are new for me too. Even that line, even though there's nothing like flashy or fancy about that line, can you feel how that feels a little more authentic than when the granddaughter speaks? All her new feelings are new for me too. Like there's a simplicity and an honesty and a different kind of syntax that's going in that feels authentic. That's why I think the voice of the daughter is the one that actually works. I think I'd go along with Holly, I think it was, to whoever it was who suggested to only use the daughter voice here. And I think I would do that. I wish he had stayed here. Some leaving cannot be undone. Not my first loss. When Dad went to the hospital with Hodgkin's, you didn't tell me he was going to die. With you, I know cancer kills. The feelings are old and new. She has your body type in her senior photo. An image will remind me of you. I have your blood. It will be squeezed from my heart. It will not be the same when it reabsorbs. And so I think there's a real emotional energy. There's really something that wants to be said in this poem, and it's from the mother to the grandmother. So, yeah. As Jamie Thomas says, a good way to put it, I only know how some of the lines make me feel. Despite the inconsistency throughout it evokes something in me. And that's a great way to put it. I mean, when I'm reading submissions, all I'm doing is like reading things and looking for that kind of feeling. And if a poem sustains that kind of feeling, then it's a good poem. You know, where there's something here, there's something like needs to be said, and I'm getting something out of it. And you can feel that emotional energy is like something that's palpable in a really strange way, but we can sense it. Like I don't know why. It's sort of a mystery of human beings, which is what makes poetry fascinating. But we all have this sort of a sense. It's like the 12th sense or something. And it's a sense for like somebody being honest in their speech and about something that matters. And when we sense that, I think it really works. And so I would tell the whole thing over again from the mother's perspective and let these scenes play out, but just keep it all from the mother's perspective. And I think that that's the direction to go with this one. Also, we didn't mention, but the Grandma's Last Visit is a really nice title too, because it says a lot, but in a way that you realize what it means, like the actual last visit by the end of the poem because of the content. So it kind of changes the meaning of that title too at the end. And so it describes the poem a little bit, sets it up a little bit, but then there's a little extra layer to it too. And so I think it's a nice title. All right, let's take a look at the other poem too. Why not? Because Emily's someone who is definitely here, frequently. She's not. I don't think she's here today, but I think she's been here before. Let's take a look at the next poem. And the next poem is Let me try to see. Sometimes it doesn't. There we go. Okay, now there's a question for this one. This is a shorter poem, like a one-pager, but there's a long question. Question for critique. How should I handle the inspiration for a poem, see the note below, when it informs the poem but isn't directly addressed? Is it better to leave out entirely? Should I have an explanatory note? Right now, I also have a nod to the inspiration in the title. Does the title work for readers who won't know the specific reference? And so you know what I'm going to do, given that. And then she has a note about what the poem's actually about. I like the way she broke this out. Thanks for doing it this way, Emily, because now I can not read that part, and we can see how it feels without the note. And then we'll go back and read the note and maybe read the poem again, and that'll be an interesting exercise too. So, the poem, and once again, this is Emily Arnold Fernandez from Scotland. And this is Requiem for the First Last Night of the Proms. Okay. I'm trying to keep the note off the page. Okay. Requiem for the First Last Night of the Proms. Amadeus was a troubled boy. The girls like him were sent to nunneries, or made wives to vicious men. For their troubles they were treated as monsters. He was feted in courts throughout the land. Clara Schumann miscarried and played a concert the next day. She was the foremost jazz artist of her era, an improviser par excellence. She got the piano for an hour a day after her composer husband spent 8 hours practicing his profession while she raised 7 kids and paid the bills. Skipping the concert was never an option. They made a movie about him, Amadeus, I mean, complete with a rock song he never would have sanctioned. He was a rebel, master of the pause, the James Dean bringing soul to Bach's mathematics. Schumann, for her part, improvised around her husband's insanity, her almost lover's desertion, her sometimes lover's suicidal tendencies. She was not asked whether she approved. I wonder whether she dreamed of screaming like they did. Or did the genetic memory passed down from her grandmother's grandmother whisper what happens to women who go mad with music? Burning is only acceptable in witches. Therefore, in the final measure, my question is this. The genius who descends into madness, does she get to dance and have orgasms? Exit stage right. So that was a longer poem. Yeah. The question says that I'm intrigued by the title. And Nancy Tennell says, composers, I love it. Yeah. Senator Fee says, this poem has so much power, I can imagine the poet revisiting this to make into something really great. I'm not sure if she's talking about that one. Nancy Tennell says, aren't the proms a series of British musical performances? I believe that might be the note. So now that we've read the poem, we've sort of had an opinion about it. And to me, to me, it feels a little bit like we're getting this sort of biopic kind of thing, where we're getting some background history, and it drifts in between some interesting lines and sort of too much sort of journalisticness, where we're just sort of almost reading without the music, a kind of, encyclopedia entry. And so I think that the key here is to keep with the music and find the voice of who's actually speaking into who. That's something we talk about a lot with on the critique. It's something we talked about on the poetry space, if you want to listen to that episode too. But having an idea of who is speaking to who really helps the voice be consistent and the music of it be consistent. And so I think I would really think about in this, who is speaking to who is telling the story, and who's listening. Rose says, stanza 2 for me is a bit too journalistic, not enough music. Yeah, that's where I was thinking this too. Okay, so let's see the note. And what does the note say? I think this is about what Nancy was talking about, Nancy Tennell. The last night of the proms is perhaps the world's top honor for a conductor. The first and only woman to have conducted it, Marianne Alsop, later saw her reputation slammed with accusations of ego, hints of abuse, and suggestions of madness. So I don't know, where does she enter? Requiem for the last night of the proms. Yeah, Michelle Noble says the summer proms at the Albert Hall are a series of concerts. See, I didn't know that. That's one of those things where I don't think, you don't want to have to tell everybody everything. I think we can look that up if we're curious. If we're interested in this topic, we probably know. But I think the note, why isn't this in here? Maureen, and if that's how you say it, Alsop, doesn't really appear in here. So the story kind of isn't quite here, I think. Let's see. Yeah, this is what Drya Monteiro says. So is this about Alsop or Clara Schumann? And so I don't understand the connection between there. So it feels like we need the note to kind of even, not feels like we do. We need the note to know what it's even about Marianne Alsop at all. And why not put that in the poem itself? That's what I would say about the note. If you wanted to, you could change the title and put Marianne Alsop in the title. So Marianne Alsop's Requiem for the last night of the proms. And then we'd know at least have a direction to point there. But without the note, we don't even get that. Schumann, composer, Alsop, conductor. That was Monica Dobos pointing that out. Yeah. Okay. So Amadeus was a troubled boy. So the connection between all these things, they're interesting details. I think both these poems, the first one about the grandmother and this one, have a lot of things swirling around that are interesting. The last one on an emotional level was really interesting. You could feel the emotional energy behind it. This one is an interesting topic that I think is like sort of being wrestled with, and there are a lot of details. It's a good story that I'm not a classical music person, but I think there's a lot here that you could enjoy whether you are or not. And even if by that I mean, like, if you know a lot about classical music, this is probably still something you don't know the details about in this relationship and how it all connects together. So I think that's interesting on a level for anybody. Mercurius says the poem is clear about the different ways women artists and men artists are treated in our society. Yeah, and so how do you like tell the whole story with Aesop, with Amadeus, and with Schumann, like tying them together? And to do that, like who is telling who? Like imagine, is it, this is Emily, right? Imagine Emily imagining you telling somebody. Imagine it's me. I don't know anything about classical music really, but I think this is an interesting story. How would you, if you were talking to me, tell me this story? Or somebody else, like somebody like in your personal life, or if you were giving a speech on it. There's some poems that are great. There's one poem, and just because it's such a great example, and I've shown this before in the Critique of the Week. This is Richard Garcia's poem, a poem by Andy Rooney. And if we just take a really quick glance at this, a poem by Andy Rooney. How about these paper clips? Consider the humble paperclip. Paperclips not like to remain in their containers. Paperclips can be found at the bottom of the sea. And it goes on like that. And the voice of Andy Rooney is like a frame for the poem and lets the poem feel really authentic and spontaneous and musical because there's so consistently Andy Rooney's voice as Richard Garcia imagines it, right? And so in this poem, you're telling me the story about Amadeus and Schumann and Aesop. And like, how would you actually tell it? Or if it's not you telling it, is it like giving a lecture on it? Like anytime you can embody a voice, imagine someone else telling it. If you could embody the voice and just tell the story in that voice, it starts to really work. And so I think that's kind of one of the things that's missing. And then get the whole story in. Yeah, because I think it's really interesting content. Nancy Sabanek says, I like the juxtaposition of the composer's stories. I do too, yeah. Rose says, it's really hard to know what to leave out, especially when you know so much about a topic. Yeah, that's true too. And that's why it's so important to think of who your audience is. And I think it works great if you think about it as one person. Just pick a person who for you to be as the voice. Pick a person, is it a professor of musicology speaking to the classroom in a lecture hall? Is it, you telling somebody on the bus because you're bored and you have like a 6-hour bus ride and you start talking, Like imagine some scenario where you're telling the story and that'll keep it interesting and authentic. Because it is an interesting story, yeah. Rose says, tell the story in Claire Schumann's voice. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Daria Montito says, I don't understand what is motivating the scene cuts from Mozart to Clara to Mozart to Clara. Well, there's this parallel thing that the way their lives were different is kind of what we want to get at, and how that speaks to the Aesop story. And it's interesting. Another thing, actually, I don't know why the perfect poet to think about this is David Kirby. Very clearly, he's got a whole. Actually, I just accepted a poem from David yesterday. It's right here. But read well, put up more than this. Really, I won't read the whole thing. His poems are kind of long. But look at a David Kirby poem, and he calls them braids. And what you have is 3 braids here. It's kind of perfect for a braided poem. So this is David Kirby's More Than This. When you tell me that the woman is visiting the grave of her college friend and she is trying not to get irritated at the man in the red truck who keeps walking back and forth and dropping tools as he listens to a pro football game on the truck radio, which is much too loud, I start to feel as though I know where the story is going, so I say, stop, you're going to make me cry. How sad the world is. When the young men died in the mud of Flanders, the headmaster called their brothers out of the classroom one by one, but when the older brothers began to die by the hundreds every day, they simply handed the child a note as he did his lessons, and of course the boy wouldn't cry in front of the others, though at night the halls were filled with the sound of schoolboys sobbing for the dead, young men only slightly older than themselves. Yet the world's beauty breaks our hearts as well. The old cowboy is riding along and looks down at his dog and realizes she died a long time ago, and that his horse did as well, and this makes him wonder if he is dead too. And as he is thinking this, he comes to a big shiny gate that opens into a golden highway, and there's a man in a robe and white wings, And when the cowboy asks what this place is, the man tells him it's heaven and invites him in, though he says animals aren't allowed. So the cowboy keeps going till he comes to an old rusty gate with a road full of weeds and potholes on the other side, and a guy in a tractor. And the guy wipes his brow and says, "You three must be thirsty. Come in and get a drink." And the cowboy says, "Okay, but what is this place?" And the guy says it's heaven. And the cowboy says, "Then what's that place down the road with a shiny gate and the golden highway?" And when the guy says, "Oh, that's hell," the cowboy says, "Doesn't it make you mad that they're pretending to be you?" And the guy on the tractor says, "No, we like it that they screen out the folks who desert their friends. You tell me your friend can't take it anymore." And she turns to confront the man who's making all the noise, to beg him to leave her alone with her grief. And that's when she sees that he's been putting up a Christmas tree on his son's grave, and that he's grieving too, but in his own way, one that is not better or worse than the woman's, just different, the kind of grief that says the world is so beautiful that it will give you no peace. And so, yeah. And so, so the poem is more than this. And we start out with a story of the woman in the grave. Then we go to this, the cowboy, where we go to the school sobbing, the school children and stuff. Then we get to the cowboy, and then we get back to, and the story about the cowboy in the heaven, and we get back to the woman at the grave. And, and so there's this movement. There's 3 stories threaded through this poem. And so how can you braid these through where you're transitioning from one story to another in a way that's as smooth and woven like a thread like that? And it's one of the great poems, and that's what Kirby does. This is a perfect setup for a poem like that. So check out some Kirby poems, not just that, but other poems. We've published like maybe 5 or 6 of his in Rattle. He's all over the place too. He's got a great book called, he had a Rattlecast too. Actually, watch the Rattlecast with David Kirby. David Kirby, can't remember when that was. Okay. Rattlecast 120 with David Kirby was November 2021. But watch that Rattlecast and him talking about this braid structure, because what you have here is just a perfect poem for that. And how can you weave these through? So we're sort of one person telling a story that has these 3 threads that sort of connect, and then you leave it open to how to interpret the way they connect. And that really leads to a powerful poem. And there's so much substance here that I think that would make a great poem. All right. Yeah. Okay. Let me look. So there's some interesting poems. I gotta go pick up my daughter because she has school year started, and she's got some after school thing, but there's no late bus, so I gotta go pick her up in 9 minutes. But let me do one more poem. Why not? So anyway, that was Emily Arnold Fernandez with those 2 poems there, both with a lot of potential. Let's see if we can quickly go to one more. It's nice to get through 5 on these critiques. Let's do one more. Let's do 6. Yeah, we have time for that. And yeah, perfect. There's 2 poems here. And who's the poet? You know what? I think we should probably wrap it. There's 2 poems here. We'll leave them for next time because they're formal and they should be interesting to talk about, actually. So let's just call it a wrap there. It's 7 minutes past the hour. That's good. So that is going to be the critique, everybody. Thanks for joining me. It was a lot of fun, as it always is. This week's guest in the Rattlecast coming up this Sunday is going to be Chris Anderson. And Chris Anderson really is one of my favorite poets. It's a poet. He was on the Rattlecast. I can't remember which one he was on now. Chris Anderson Rattlecast. He was on one. No, I can't find it. Anyway, he was on a Rattlecast at some point. He's a great poet. He's also a Catholic deacon, which is not something, we get a lot of, he was the interviewee in our Poets of Faith issue, but his writing style is just so wonderful. Great storyteller through poetry. You can see really kind of the difference in fiction and poetry really clearly in his work. Because he has these leaps of his imagination where he starts to tell a story, he builds it in the same way a storyteller would do it, and then he lets the mind wander and leap in interesting ways. His new book is Love Calls Us Here. His past books, The Next Thing Always Belongs was wonderful. That's the one we talked about in the last Rattlecast. He also has, as a Catholic deacon, he gives a homily every Sunday and he includes poetry every week in his homilies. So it's like that's like the speech, I guess, that they give to people at church. And so you can sign up for those, which are really fascinating to read. Great advice on life and wonderful poems too at Deacon Chris Anderson, deaconchrisanderson.com. But anyway, that is the guest for this week, Chris Anderson. The prompt, once again, was to take your least favorite word to see in a poem and make that the title of the poem. So we'll get to see your least favorite words, and we'll get to see some poems that take them in different directions, hopefully. That's Rattlecast 258, Sunday, August 18th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.